You're good. Kelly, you're good.
Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Education work session to order. It is February the 3rd.
Yes.
Adam, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Argo, Mr. Hort, here. Mr. Wynn, Ms. Schaefer,
Here.
Ms. Casper,
here. Okay. We expect Mr. Argo to be here, so hopefully soon. Can I have a motion for the approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? Mr. Zink?
Mr. Hort, yes. Ms. Schaefer,
Yes.
Ms. Casper.
Yes. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Dr. Whiteley, you're on.
Long time no see, right?
Right.
If you were, so kind of two things, or really one main topic before we have our executive session is a policy discussion, but I want to be super clear that it's about public comment, but in regard to policy. So we're not having a public comment like session today. We are talking about the idea of public comment through the lens of our existing policies. So in, just to give a little background, in December, actually, I think it was Isaac's last meeting, he requested, actually second to last meeting, he requested this topic be kind of brought forth in the meeting. And we talked about at the meeting that our normal process is to look at things first via the policy committee. We discuss them in policy committee, and eventually then, depending on the outcome, that works its way to the Board of Education through the policy of a first read and a second read for approval. So again, his request was for us to look at public participation or bringing public comment back into our regular board meetings. So we did have a discussion in our policy meeting. You have a packet there at your table, and just for ease, the pink is the Neola template. Okay, so I would encourage, I made it visible so it wouldn't get lost, because I think this is kind of what needs to ground our conversation. The white pieces of paper or series of papers are our historical view of our policies. Okay, now I'm not saying they're from here to the beginning of time, but I picked the last several iterations of the policies as they've gone. So what I mean by that, in policy, we looked at the very same thing, except for the template, and Mr. Horton in that meeting had asked that we pull the Neola template just to make sure that we had that in front of us. So the pink piece of paper is the Neola suggested, legally vetted, this is what you would put in place with options, okay? The series of white pieces of paper that you have, again, are our historical overview of how things have iterated. In the policy discussion, we talked about that in our policy meeting, and I'm giving a historical overview, and again, we can dive into this further, but we have been in a situation before where we had two public comments, very similar to like maybe what you experienced at the Westchester Township meeting. So they have one at the beginning, which is agenda specific, and then they have one at the end that is kind of open topic. We have had situations where we've had one listening session. We have had, as you know, kind of our kind of recent iteration is that it happens during the listening session and people sign up, and we do that prior to the regular board meeting actually starting. And I think there's some history there that we ought to talk about through that. But in the policy meeting, one of the things that we had talked about is that we have heard some feedback, particularly that the sign-up sheet, having to sign up in advance, the morning of the board meeting is a little clunky for people. So in the policy meeting, there was the idea of eliminating that, at least, eliminating the sign-up sheet, and that a person would come to the meeting, have the ability to sign up, and then we would check addresses and things to make sure they meet the policy requirements, and then they would be able to speak. We also discussed having one public comment session, either before the meeting, after the meeting, but we didn't like really the idea of two. And we talked about the clunkiness of, is it on the agenda? Is it not on the agenda? Like, what does that mean? Sometimes that's not always clear. And so really the policy committee had talked about eliminating the sign-up sheet, keeping it still before the meeting, not in the public meeting, And then also talked about, if we didn't quite land on a definitive on this, but we had talked about that if we were going to keep it before the meeting, perhaps looking at a different start time for the meetings, because right now we understand that maybe that's difficult for some folks to make it to the 5:30 slot because of dinner or families or pickup times or things like that. So potentially looking at if we were going to keep it prior to the meeting, moving that to maybe a 6:30 listening session with a 7 o'clock start. But again, that we didn't get really finalized on that, but I think the policy group at least felt that the sign-up sheet was very clunky and should be eliminated, and that, again, address checks would happen prior, and that we would go to a listening session or in the meeting, wherever it landed, that it would be a one-time opportunity, not specifically tied to the agenda or not. So I bring this kind of history to you, and several of you have lots more history about this than I do, in my 18-month period here. But my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong in this, is that the reason it was taken out of the meeting, and put in the kind of the listening session as we know it prior, was the, type of comments, that were being said in the meeting, or one, where you have public audiences and children in those audiences for presentations and things, that sometimes the content of that was, not the best for young ears. And also, I'll use the word at some points, perhaps got very aggressive, in nature. And so it was moved out of. Again, those of you who are here can speak further of that, but that would be my kind of, interpretation of what I've heard. And that it was, since it's been moved out, it's been a little bit more, maybe professional dialogue that we hear at the table rather than what was heard previously. So that's kind of the summary. And I think the point of this meeting is to continue to discuss that. The reason I draw your attention to this piece of paper, this is our history, and our history is great. You always want to look at history and where we've been and how we've got here, and all that's valid. But ultimately, we as a group have the decision to say, what do we want it to be within legal ramifications, right? And so looking at the template, I think we can craft a policy that says what we want it to be, while certainly respecting where we've been, but also where we want to move going forward. And so that's why I would say, yes, these are important, but this is more important because this is the legal parameters that are given to us. And again, if we go outside of these, we'd certainly want to look at legal interpretation of that, but these are the options available to us, that majority of school districts in Ohio use when crafting that policy of where we would like to land going forward.
Yeah, if I might build on a few things. One, I don't think there was consensus coming out of the committee as far as where the public comment section
Correct.
should sit, whether it's listening or in meetings.
Yep.
So that's an open thing we wanted the board to discuss. And then secondary, with Neil, it wasn't lost on us that there has been a lot of litigation around public comment in the state of Ohio, including ourselves. And so we felt that understanding the Neola template, which was the aligned across, gives us more insulation from making sure that we're aligned with basically the legal guidance on public comment in the state. So that's why we decided to kind of take a look at this template as a starting point. We can customize, and then the process would be there to get legal interpretation as far as, okay, Doug wants to do this, that's way outside the legal bounds. Maybe we shouldn't put that as part of the policy, for example.
The other thing I think is important, wherever we land, in whatever capacity, sign up sheet, no sign up sheet, in the meeting, not the meeting. This is the easy part. Putting it on paper and saying how you want it to be is in theory the easy part. What that looks like in day-to-day interaction and play out, that is where it gets more complex. And so wherever we land, I would like to make sure that we as a group, or anybody that participates in board meeting, would have training. Sounds very formal, but that's the only word I can think of right now. Training or PD on what this looks like in execution. So for example, if somebody goes over their 3 minutes, how do you make sure that that is equitable to the next speaker? If somebody is saying something unprofessional, what does that mean and how do you handle that and what are our legal parameters? So whatever we decide, there is an element of crafting the policy and certainly adopting that policy, but there's also the PD that comes with that about what are the legal ramifications in the meeting and how does that play out from the timer, from the microphone, from the technology, because that is where typically the lawsuits and the litigation tend to come in. It's not the policy, it's how that policy is enacted in the room in the moment.
Right. I think that's the hardest.
Yeah, that is the
That's gonna be the
hardest part.
hardest part.
As somebody who's been a timer, that can be very awkward when you say time and they
And what
just
do you
keep
do if you
talking,
don't stop?
right?
Yeah.
And so there has to be a plan, a proactive plan about how to handle that if and when it happens.
That's part of the just having a good process,
Yep, good
knowing the process, good process, because that's where the problems we ran into previously was because we hadn't followed our own process. And then one was able to say, well, if you did this, then I do that. So,
And I think we talked about
Firming that up.
that example that we had where there was a mother talking about her child and the suicide that and the natural instinct is to have empathy there and stuff like that. But just by not cutting her off in mid-sentence, that opened us up to legal risk. Right. And so that's where we have to make sure we account for it. And how do we take the natural tendencies of people into account and the legal risk? So
That's phase 2 of this process.
Yeah. First, we gotta get the policy down.
So, I mean, I know the big question is where it lands, right, before the meeting or in the meeting, but making sure, again, because not all voices were at that policy discussion, our thoughts about eliminating the sign up process.
I want to put a fine
Okay.
point on that. It's replacing it. So
Yes.
basically, instead of the pre-sign up that happens starting
Right.
Friday to
Right.
Monday, it would be when people show up at the meeting, there is a way, and we said it should be digital so we can house the records, as well as then for legibility purposes, for the record checking, you could sign up right when you show up. And the team would process the checks to make sure that they're eligible to speak before this listening session would happen. So
So the vetting still happens, but it happens in the meeting rather than prior, which is very common.
Well, that's how-
Very common. That's
yeah.
how most districts probably follow that process, right? And normally your policy states that you live in the district, you're a parent in the district, you're a business owner in the district, those kind of things. Are we comfortable with that piece? That we do the vetting in the room versus the sign up sheet that happens in advance and that vetting happens prior?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. The other piece is 1 or 2, and that being linked to the agenda piece. Full transparency, I've never known anything but just 1 public comment. I've never experienced 2 until I went to Westchester and I was like, oh, look at this. This is like a thing. I do think people get confused internally and externally about what it means to be tied to the agenda, right? Because our day-to-day business is kind of everything related to school, right? So I think it's just cleaner for ease of interpretation to just say you have 1 and you're able to talk about anything and everything related to school, right? You don't have to worry about if it's on the agenda. And I certainly don't want, I think about our agendas. I don't want you to have to wait a couple months to talk about something because it's not on the agenda. Do you know what I mean? I just think it should be, if you have something to say to any of us, that you do that in the professional manner in the listening session.
We also talked about, Alex.
I was gonna say, I think it's also harder to enforce because you're then going into, okay, what's the content of what they're saying? Is it agenda? Is it not? And because of that, I think in the past, we've even seen people take advantage of it and get double the time by speaking at both when it's like, is that really agenda?
Well, and we talked about in policy too, the problem with the second one is the timing. You don't know how long your meeting is gonna go. If you have something you wanna say that's not an agenda item and our meeting goes 2.5 hours and an executive session or before the executive session, then those people are sitting there without any idea of when it's gonna be over. And if we do right now we start at 6, right? 5:36. If we do a later start, that even pushes it back later for an end of the meeting for somebody to know when they're gonna speak. So that was something we talked about.
I shared my experiences when I wasn't on the board and signed up to speak, navigating that, what was on the agenda, what wasn't, especially with agenda item changes, it was just very confusing.
And if you can, the other thing is if you amend the agenda before it goes live, now they've missed the sign up and they want to talk on something, we've just amended the agenda. So we thought 1 at the beginning or 1.
And that's true, as far as placement of it, it should be before we take any action, right? So if somebody does have something that's on the agenda,
Right.
should hear from them regardless of when it's placed before we would take action on any item. So
I think I'm hearing consensus on one, not tied to the agenda, it would be whatever is on your mind that you need to speak about, okay? So then, I think that leads us to the $1 million question of placement, right? Is it before the meeting? And I think if it is before the meeting, there's, like it is now, there's an opportunity to talk about timing and what is the best time for our community. Or are we looking at bringing that back at the beginning of the regular meeting before you would take any action? Thoughts?
I'll share some thoughts since I haven't been in these discussions on policy. I think another piece of history that's important to consider is in the past, we used to have the rule that if you were going to make derogatory statements about staff, that needed to happen in executive session, understanding that staff did not have the ability to defend themselves at the table. So I'm mad at Sally Smith because I feel my child was slighted on an exam. I come to the microphone, I say, you know, Sally Smith is the worst teacher. I feel like she's abusive, whatever the case might be. And now, again, that would get investigated. There's no valid truth to that. But now we have that as part of our official minutes because our recordings are our minutes when that's in the meeting. Sally Smith's reputation has taken a hit, even if it's completely invalid. And we have been told that creates some concern of if then we become complicit to slander because it is part of our official record of what is now longstanding in Sally Smith's future. So I feel like it was a different situation with public comment when we were able to have that. But because that was a situation where we were challenged, and I even know I've heard other districts have not changed that practice, but because we were challenged on that, we had to change that practice and anything was allowed to be said. That I worry about the potential liability we open the district up to when our public comment becomes part of our official minutes. So I also think about when we had people who watched our meeting for sport to see who could be more outlandish at the mic and what they said and the impact that had on staff and being able to focus on the business of the meeting, which it is a business meeting. And I feel like that reflected in our results when we saw a focus became on theater in some instances versus the substance of the meeting. And you know, even like from a recruiting standpoint, when people watch a board meeting before they consider coming to a district. And when they're seeing that type of theater and things that could potentially be said about them and not be challenged because it can't be in real time, I think that creates challenges from a recruiting and retention and keeping the best people. And that concerns me. So I look at what problem are we trying to solve? We always have, and we've always wanted to make sure that public participation, any community member can address and speak to the board. To me, that's the point of public participation at a board meeting. We need to hear what our community says. And so I feel that if we continue to have it before the meeting without it being part of the official minutes and that recording, that still allows our community to continue to access us. By removing the barriers, I think that would be a strong step in making people feel like we're not making it difficult for them to do so. And perhaps if people want it to be somewhat in part of the record, when there is public comment, it would be the superintendent or the board president at the time could have the opportunity to recap any concerns or any whatever the issue is that is raised so that that is recorded if others want to participate in that. And again, anybody has the ability to come to that session and listen for themselves as well.
We did used to do that for historical. We, even when it was in the meeting, we recapped it afterwards. Most times.
I think, Kelly, you do a good job of this sometimes in meetings over my time here of reminding what public participation at a board meeting means, right? Because I do think sometimes there is some confusion that people think it is a dialogue, right? I know sometimes, even in my history, people have said like, well, they didn't respond, or they didn't answer my question, or it is a very kind of one-sided conversation, meaning people come, they share, or they're concerned, or they express themselves to the Board of Education, and there's not a response in the meeting, right? It's really just an intake of information. Now, that doesn't mean that the person is not followed up with later, right? So for example, if you have a special education question, the appropriate person, probably more the governance team, or the administration team, would follow up with you and kind of listen or delve into that. But in the meeting, I do think sometimes people are surprised because they ask questions or they make comments and it's not a dialogue in the meeting. There is a follow-up after that. So I do think that is an important note, that it's not a conversation. It is more of an opportunity to hear and then get those tidbits in the right spot to the variety of people. And then there's the appropriate follow-up as needed.
It sometimes, I think, needs to be a reminder though. Again, I think if you're new to the district, if you have a kindergartner, you don't know what a board meeting is, to understand that this is a meeting of the business of the board where we allow public comments. It's not a public town hall. And I think that I know that I've had people contact me that said, well, I want to come and ask some questions and get some answers. And I've had to explain to new parents that that's not how it works. That, if you have a question, we will get back to you, or you can email us, you can email the appropriate person. If you email us and it's a special ed question, obviously we will forward it to Dr. Whiteley, who will forward it, to Mrs. Longworth, to be able to get the answer that they want. But I think you're right. I think it's just a matter of making sure to educate them to know.
And
I want to make sure we hear from the other board members who haven't had a chance to weigh in, especially because you're new board members and this is the first time you're encountering this.
I guess one thing that I wanted to build on that Julie was talking about is I was looking through the historical policies, and I know, and Julie kind of mentions this, at one point we had a list of topics that people were allowed to talk about. One of those was said that you couldn't make derogatory comments about staff. And I know I think we've gotten conflicting legal advice as if we did have that, and I didn't see any content-based or subject-based in the Neola template, but you could say you can't have any staff conversation at all. That's content neutral, potentially. And so you would be protected from a little bit of that liability piece, but then it becomes an enforcement problem, like we were talking about with some of these other things. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm curious. I was in the audience for this policy meeting, and I know there is some question about what level of legal protection do we get from Neola for sticking with their template. And I was curious if there is any kind of follow up on that.
Yeah. So the template, basically, when you see a template, that means it has been vetted prior, right? So they've taken kind of the review of all the 600 plus districts, and they've had multiple legal terms, legal firms look at it to say, this is our recommendation. Now, to Doug's point, if you go off the template, that is certainly allowable, but then the legal vetting, you take it and they vet it kind of in the moment, right? And so this is kind of the tried and true. It doesn't mean that this is the only thing you can do, but if we go outside of this, we would need to have legal interpretation to say, is that valid? What is the liability? Those kind of pieces. And sometimes, they will tell you there's no liability. Sometimes they will tell you there is a slight risk here, and they will walk you through kind of what that risk is, and you make the decision based on that.
I will also share my perspective, which is when we attend Capitol Conference and some of these other conferences, you will see the panels put on by the legal experts saying, Ohio Revised Code states this you're legally protected. And then we are an example where we've had case law decided against us that conflicts with that advice. Mm-hmm. So it's always an interesting dynamic to be in that room with those legal teams. And they're like, Yeah, no, that's not right. So this is just a very highly litigious space right now, and there's conflicting decisions from the judicial system as far as how it's being implemented. So regardless of template, we're not going to have 100% protection because no district has 100% protection. But it is, how do we make sure that we have at least as much perspective and guidance for anything that could come against us? But I think also there is a thing of when we choose our battles, how do we make sure, and this is my point of view, how do we encourage people to participate the right way versus, trying to get 100% protected? Sometimes, just risk with everything we do.
I'll give a clarification real fast too. The Neola protection that we have is stating that it's legally a legal policy.
That's
A lot of times where the problems come in is the implementations and the practice of, and that's what it's legal. But if we didn't follow it procedurally very, very clean, then what we found was that opened us up to, well, if you did this, then you have to do that, which then deviates off of the policy.
I think if Mr. Nguyen has to leave to go to class in a few minutes, and so
Yes.
I would love to have his input before he has to go be a college student.
I appreciate that. I'm unfamiliar with case law. Is there specific cases where, somebody slanders a staff member at a board meeting and the staff member comes back, sues the district?
There's a variety of case law in this regard around slander, around First Amendment rights. There's a variety of case law around this. There's even a variety of case law around video recordings of board meetings. So this is one of those policies, particularly since COVID. I think that has created a lot of traction because in COVID, some things changed and you had video recordings come and things where things could be played back. So I do think depending on the district, depending and in Ohio and other states, yes, there's a variety of case law. And they're kind of all over the board. I'm just being honest. When we went to OSBA, I said in a session that said you should not video record board meetings. Now, everybody in the room was like, we totally video record board meetings because it's kind of the nuance that our communities have gotten used to be able to have that function to not have to be in the room. So like I said, depending on, and you could ask in November and then ask in March and the interpretation might be different as well. And we experienced that in other avenues as well, like rooming situations and things on field trips, that really it's one of those changing pieces that you just kind of stay up to date on and keep a pulse on.
You get the case law, you had to have it all the way through court. You can go back to our minutes, our YouTube videos of September, I believe, of 22, and you could see an example of then we did get sued, we did settle. Because after a legal opinion, it was chosen that to fight wouldn't have, it was a federal suit for freedom of speech.
My biggest concern is, and I will say, the work that the policy committee has done, I think that it is important, and it's, you walk before you run. When I think of public participation and our policy regarding that, obviously we have, what is this? How many packets is this?
Several.
That's not even all of them.
So when I think of our public participation, it appears to be flexible depending on our need. And, my thought process is that if it's recorded, then, maybe someone who can't make a board meeting can go back to the recording and maybe a parent or whoever asks a question that is pertinent to their concern. And then, maybe the parent can follow up with that parent if they know them, or, go to the end of the board meeting and see if it's recapped and see if their concern is addressed. So without even having to go to the board meeting, right? So if it's recorded, you can answer questions that maybe other people who couldn't be at the board meeting can have addressed. I think that if it were found that we bring back a recorded public comment and, it does blow up into a huge situation, then, as we've done before, we would kind of fix the policy as needed. But right now, I think that we're in a cooler climate. People aren't going for, you don't have, people trying to go for the most views anymore. That was, I think, certainly a cultural thing post-COVID. Now, I think, like I said, it's just a cooler climate. And for me, at least, I think I would like to test what it would look like now with this new board. And I think with a mindset shift in the community.
But did I hear you say that, again, that parental, you know, if I have the same concern as another parent, and that might be helpful information to me, could that be answered by doing the recap? And then it gets us away from potentially the actual words that are saying, but we're still able to capture the nature of that public comment and concern. And then they can still see what those commonalities are if there are common concerns. So could that be kind of a compromise position of protecting the integrity of the meeting while still being able to capture concerns? And I mean, I don't think anybody's trying to hide any concerns that are brought forward. They want those addressed. So perhaps could that be a midpoint way to do that? Where
My concern is, I think the implementation of that becomes very difficult, and because do we recap everybody and do we capture the innocence? Like, that's getting more into the places where I think that would, we recap 3 of the 4 comments, or we misrepresent one of the comments. I think that gets us into a more problematic space than just letting the comments share as they.
I think we recap all of them. I think in the past we've recapped them all, whatever they.
And I'll say over the years, I've watched different people recap, and there's interpretation that happens in those recaps. I remember times where I felt the president did not capture my comments, and I followed up and said, you misrepresented me in what I said in that. And that was when they were being recorded and they were recapping. So I think that just puts a lot of risk as far as people being upset with how those are recapped.
I do worry that, to Mr. Wynn's point, we've lived this part of it. It's harder to go back and forth. It's harder to do what you said and then it blows up in our face and then we pull it back. To me, it's easier to do baby steps and see if what we've heard, the major concerns, if you were to do everything that we talked about, other than putting it in the meeting, would that make people, or is it just the fact that people want to be on camera? I don't know.
I'll share my perspective, and I've been kind of in this place before I ran for the board, when I ran for the board, and since I've been on the board. I think when we try to solve for the few exceptions of unruly behavior, we put in barriers to participation. And I know when I was a parent, and I'm still a parent, it is tough to navigate this district, and it is tough to understand how to get your voice. We are 17,000 students, 18,000 students. Just getting a voice at your school is hard enough. And it is intimidating coming into a public meeting and speaking, plus even public speaking. If people have the desire to get up and overcome that fear of public speaking and address any concern with us, I feel breaking down those barriers should be the best possible. And I think it should be part of the meeting, because then we let people judge. I also think our community can judge. And I remember some of the people who did come during the heated moments, and there was times I didn't even understand what they were saying. Like their logic didn't make sense. But our community can judge that and says, okay, I'm going to take that, or I'm going to leave it. And so I'm a little less concerned about that. I am concerned about the legal aspects, but I think it normally sits in the meeting. So
let's remember, public comment is not the only way you can address the board. There are many avenues to address the board. I just want to remind people of that. There's email, which I think we do a good job of answering. I think all of our phone numbers are on the website. So just, I don't want this discussion to be the public comment is the only way that people can address us, because there are other ways for people to address us. Yeah. My concern becomes, to Alex's point, we have been told we cannot list what you can talk about. So that opens up. I mean, forget what they say about us. We hear that all the time. You know, they can say whatever they want about us, but when you start, you are going to have a hard time retaining a staff if they know that they can be called out at any minute for something that isn't accurate.
I think there's also opportunity to create a forum for people who do have those legitimate concerns, which is at the meeting, even in the roll-up, we say, we prefer to hear personnel issues in executive session, and create a venue for redirecting that fervor into an executive session where we could hear about it. That is not that hard to take 3 minutes in call an executive session and do that. for a concern. And I think most people with valid concerns are just trying to be heard. And by the time they come to the school district, they're probably frustrated that they don't feel like they haven't been heard at the building level. So in that moment, if you provide them a chance to have the right audience with us in a protected session, I think that they would most likely choose that. There may be some people who are up vendettas and stuff like that, but I think we could, again, get most of this accomplished in a healthy way.
Let me understand this too. It's not just you can come in executive session. There's the process before you get to executive session, correct? It's all the, I mean,
We haven't talked about, what I'm thinking
Right,
is,
so what
hey,
people
during
think
sign up to say, hey, we don't want to hear personnel issues in public comment, but there is a forum to have it addressed in executive
after you
session.
go through all of these steps. You have to file a complaint. then-
Yeah, we can verify that, but like
Yeah, I don't
direct them into the process
Yes, I just
versus.
didn't want
And Doug, are you saying all staff? I know we say issues, but I just want to we're saying all personnel comments, so praise and
Well,
negative.
that's what the lawyers told us. If you don't allow negative, you cannot allow good.
Correct. Well, I still think what we're hearing as well is we can't actually prevent someone from getting up at the mic and talking a personnel issue.
Correct.
So the idea is let's redirect them to the process that's going to most likely address their needs. There's still going to be some issues that would be there, but then I think it's not controlling what people say at the mic. I think that's the thing that really bothers me about this is there's so much trying to control people giving us feedback. And I don't think that's our role. Our role is to actually enable it as much as possible. And so, yes, people are going to come and say things that, maybe are unfounded or that, but that's the world we live in and the laws that happen and what we're able to do. And so if the judicial system is going to back us up, then that's just part of Public Education Day, which is unfortunate.
Well, and I also worry about there's no law protecting the second grader in the front row hearing some of the things that are said, and that's not.
I think this should happen after we have the community spotlights, so we can actually have those students leave. And then, if there's a second grader who's sitting through our policy discussion at 9:00, that's great. I don't see a lot of kids there. I see Spark kids, and they can definitely handle whatever is being said in public comment. So I think we can structure our meetings a little better. We still need it at the beginning, but we could do community spotlight and then have public comment.
I was gonna say, for me, a big part is the accessibility. So we have the sign up piece, but I think whether it's in the meeting or not in the meeting, leads to a lot of clunkiness as well. So like someone was asking me the other day, so what time does the meeting start? I'm like, well, it depends. Did someone sign up for a listening session spot? Then you may want to get there at 5:30. And if we only have one person, then it's like, all right, we got potentially 3 minutes of conversation, and then we twiddle our thumbs for 27 minutes, and then we have the meeting. I think we got the best example of how this can create some clunkiness at our org meeting. I don't think anyone would argue that was clunky. So to me, that's a big part. I think if it's in the meeting, we also have the flexibility if there is a topic that's of importance and that we do need feedback on, we can extend the time to listen to people, because if there is an issue where it makes sense to do that, it'd be nice to have the flexibility to do that versus, oh, well, we've got a notice meeting right here. We don't have the ability to move things around. And nobody wants to be there until, midnight listening to public comment. But if there's things that need to be said, maybe it's worth it sometimes. I wouldn't think it's the regular thing. And I don't think anyone wants the circus. No one wants to go back to the circus. I know we've had public comment, I want to say twice I can remember over the past year. We had it, there was a retire rehire discussion, and I don't think anyone signed up. And then I think at our forum, our community forum, we had a couple people get up, and they had some good points, and I thought it was valuable to hear that. So to me, it's the clunkiness, that liability piece with the employees. I'd be willing to have further conversation about if it makes sense to take that risk on, in terms of saying no staff comments at all. I like Doug's idea of redirecting. I'm guessing you were saying redirect still, if people get up and talk about it, there's nothing we can do, but That at least having that redirection would give an outlet for that for people without kind of the risk or a little bit less risk. So I guess that's kind of where I'm on. The only other thing that I would add is I know every single one of us up here, if someone reaches out and wants to have a conversation, we would have a conversation with them. It's not us, you know, there's not just one way to contact the board. There's all kinds of ways. And I don't think that's what people think. I don't think that we're not responsive. But yeah, I think those are the majority of the thoughts I have.
A lot of it's going to be in the execution because speaking to the clunkiness, I mean, we will still have parameters like 30 minutes. We will have to stop the public comments unless we do have the ability of 47 people have signed up. But the clunkiness part of the signing up too, we will have to have restrictions on that as far as like signups are from 5:30 to 6. If you get there at 6:01 and you come into the meeting and you want to speak, there's not a place for that. So there would still be some measures that we would have to have in place.
The way it was prior to COVID, let's go back that far, because I used to be like the list runner. Yeah, I would have that. For the first part, I would typically have that up there at the very beginning. The second part, I believe it was a little more flexible where somebody could have sparked something in the meeting, they could have wrote it down, and then we just didn't have as much at that second piece.
The problem we ran into is that we were not following our own policy. I hate to say that we were not checking addresses. So that's where we ran into issues where we had people speaking at the mic derogatory that were not members of our community because we weren't actually doing our due diligence to check to make sure. So we would really have to make sure.
And I think if we have the one time only, I think it eliminates that.
Right.
Oh, something was sparked during the meeting. Well, we have the one time. It's right at the beginning of the meeting after potentially the community spotlight. So even if we wanted that flexibility, we wouldn't need it because there wouldn't be another public participation point.
Sorry.
Is there the ability to not have it be part of the recording, Adam? And do you have any further thoughts, having lived through, again, 3 of us at this table have been there when we've seen the disruption and lack of focus that our meetings took because of it?
Well, when you have it in the meeting, then from the start to the end of the meeting is the recording. And that's just the minutes of the meeting. So there isn't a way without a different policy change to go back to say written or recorded, maybe to do that.
Because it wasn't just about what was being said at the mic. It was about the disruption that it caused and being able to move on after that to try to do board business.
Because even when it was in the meeting, something to keep in mind, we would still record in the minutes who signed up and the topic.
Right.
And if go all the way back to around September of 22, I had received a question about the minutes didn't capture this because something sounded one way and something else sounded a different way. And so then if you would look at and then we did approval of minutes, but then we did an amended minutes after that. And then if you look forward from there, you'll start to see that those executive sessions where it says topic, I did everything to make it one word because one word wouldn't be bias in any way, shape, or form. So we did go through kind of a weird thing, and that's where it kind of sparked me too on the recaps. When you recap, it's almost like you have to recap in a way. Like if you go back to those minutes, you can see of one word, what was the topic? One word, because one word could be either good or bad. Staff. Well, that could be either good or bad. Right. We don't even know.
My other concern is that, we have, policy committee. I don't know how long y'all met. But, you have these discussions for quite a while. And then the legislature does something completely different. And, there you go, like Neola is based off of, it's legal advice based off of the federal law and the US code and the Ohio revised code right now. Well, the legislature has a bill on the docket right now, HB 609, and it's public comment for cities and townships and school districts, right? Not the legislature, but school districts and everything else. So my concern is that, we have all these conversations only to revisit this and have the whole thing blown wide open, and we have to, come back to the table. I would like us to be mindful of what the legislature is doing and take a more proactive approach. I will say I do like what Mr. Horton was saying with, if we can't stop, if we can't, if there are concerns that are being addressed or being brought to the mic that probably shouldn't, provide them with a forum so that it takes that direction instead, perhaps in some sort of, executive session, just so that the concerns, regarding staff aren't recorded and we don't open ourselves up to litigation.
I do think I would agree with you to watch legislation. I think we have to be careful on basing what we do based on legislation that's pending. Only because, oh my goodness, with everything they're putting out there on a daily basis, we could be chasing our tails. But yes, I saw that as well, that bill which I guess is still in committee. Has it gotten to the House floor? It hasn't. But yeah, absolutely. But I think we have to be careful.
We live this with the cell phone policy,
Yeah,
right? So
right.
I mean, and that was them updating within 6 months their
Right.
own law, right? Yeah.
That's just the way of the world right now.
Yeah, unless it's an emergency policy, there's still a process for Neola to say, okay, the law changed, here's an update that we
Right.
recommend you do, and
Right.
so I think if there is legislation, then there's a easy way that fits into the process that's already in place. that
Usually the
let
legislators are pretty good at saying implementing it at the beginning of the school year or something.
I just, last thing, if it's baby steps, right? I don't want us to have a more, a drastically different public comment and then legislation changes and now we're going from here to here. Maybe the first steps, like I think the policy committee came up with Doug's implementation and then, so on and so forth, so that we're not just, kind of taken by surprise when the legislature does something. I appreciate it, team. And do you need these back?
No, you can keep.
Okay, I guess help me understand that. So are you saying instead of going from A to Z right now, we should go to A to M right now?
I think, with regard to the signups being taken out, I think that's a step in the right direction. I think, having the board president recap, I think that's a step in the right direction. I think right now that's a good compromise. But I will state my sort of end goal, how I see it is, just traditional, someone comes up to the mic and those concerns are recorded. But, if the legislature forces us to go to that immediately, then I think that it's board would be taken by surprise because, we haven't even gone in that direction. But I think with the different steps that we're taking, what Mr. Horton was saying, we can kind of go in that direction and not be taken by surprise.
I'm reminded of what Ms. French said, when Mr. Adi brought this up. And I think that's what you alluded to as well, is we want to hear from our public. And I think we all would agree, whether you're talking master facilities, whether you're talking public comment, there is a lack of engagement. Now, why that is, I think that's the $1 million question, right? But I do think making sure we understand what variables influence that is important. Because I do think we all want more engagement, right? So I know Mr. Nguyen Mr. Nguyen just said, maybe we take iterative steps. I know it's also been proposed. The one thing about the executive session piece, and I hear that, and I certainly love that from a staff buffer. I worry about the kind of that interpretability of what goes there, and I'm going to use myself as an example. I could see someone coming to the mic, and I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised yesterday that someone didn't come in public listening session to talk about my snow day decision, right? And so I say that you could say I'm talking about snow days, but then when you get up to talk about snow days, it's Dr. Whiteley's asinine decisions, right?
Yes.
And suddenly it turns into a staffing conversation. So I think that is a little bit clunky. But I've also been on the receiving end where I've had to sit quietly and listen to staff members, have some pretty rough things said about them, and that is certainly awkward for everybody in the room. So I don't have a good answer on that, but I do worry about that. I like the idea of being able to get it in executive session, but I don't really know if we'll have that luxury just because of, to your point, if you say I'm talking about X subject, even if it's one word, that can mean a lot of things to people when they come to the mic. I do think, and it's always been true, and I do think this is the First Amendment is a very living thing, right? And you talk about legislation, it is probably the hot topic that gets the most legislation review of what does that mean and what are the protections and what does that do with social media and video recordings and all of that. So going back to the question of iteration, kind of like A to Z or A to M, do we have a?
Can we go just really quickly, the executive session piece? I think we need to make sure people understand, we're not talking about standing at the mic and they all of a sudden say, Dr. Whiteley's, a snow queen.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, wait, that has to,
Yeah,
we
correct.
don't go from there
No.
to executive
No.
session.
No,
It's a process that there's a complaint, there's a level. So if we,
We have to follow our complaint process. to
right,
get
so I
there.
just don't want people that are listening right now to think we're gonna go from public comment to executive session in a half an hour and just, yeah, because.
I think we also have to be very careful because as the presiding officer to say that you can stop somebody, I feel like that's one of the reasons, again, we went to before so that anything could be said and what was said, because again, that's what schools have gotten in trouble for. I understand one of our local residents sued Xenia when they were up speaking at Xenia, and I heard recently that they won that lawsuit against Xenia because it's, if you stop somebody once they've started speaking, and by the time you realize it's a negative and you try to stop them, A, it's already been said. And B, then it becomes well, you stopped them, you didn't stop me. I feel like, again, we can encourage, but as we know, if somebody's looking for their 3 minutes of fame, that's not their objective. Their objective is to create that situation in the meeting. And so I just think whatever process we have, we cannot put on our presiding officer to try to stop somebody mid-sentence, because that creates,
I agree.
again, just a nearly impossible situation to manage. And
I mean,
it's-
derogatory is very, very interpreted.
Exactly.
Well, and you have to be careful, as we saw at a township meeting, that their limit is 3 minutes and they let someone talk for 8. I was like, what are they doing? But the next person, there was nobody else active, but what happens when the next person wants to, you let someone finish their sentence, so it's 3 minutes and 20 seconds, but then the next person, to Doug's point, I was the person that had to stop the woman who was talking about her child's death. It was awful. I went in my car and cried after the meeting. So, but I knew that by legal, that's what we had to do, because if I hadn't stopped, if I had let her speak, what about the person that then's gonna come and talk about, the treasurer doesn't, whatever, I can't, then I stop them because it's derogatory to our staff. To your point, no matter what happens, we're gonna need a lot of legal guidance on. And again, I think the problem is that it's interpretive on the day. I mean, I sat in OSBA sessions, 2 legal sessions where they literally said the exact opposite of each other. I'm like, what in the world are we doing?
I think we can use technology a little bit to take that out of like the presiding officer's hands a little bit of like, okay, the microphone shuts off at 3 minutes. Like just that way it's more of a technical rather than a.
Is that legal though?
It is
legal for us?
following policy, like.
Yes.
Well, everything is illegal
Right.
based, right? But I think at least then there's the consistency, and that's what I do here across all the legal things. Whatever you do,
You got
do it consistently.
Right.
That's going to put you in a better place.
I mean, the lawsuit that was dismissed was because the person was stopped for not following policy, not for what they said.
And on the personal side of things, when Ms. Casper said somebody could say something about the treasurer, what we've learned in my time has been that if somebody did come to the mic in public participation and did say something about me that damaged me professionally, then that would be between me, the person, and that person. It would be on me. And so that's another thing for employees that you as a board would want to keep in mind. It would potentially have employees in a way that if somebody was damaging them professionally, then the employee would have to take the action. It wouldn't be a district action. And that was something that we learned. So that's something else just to, there is protections. It's just not as protected as what we're typically used to because the employee would have to do their own action.
But they could
Come after the board as well.
come out to the board as well.
They can cite.
The employee, you could sue the person that said it and the board because we allowed it. We heard that.
That's part of it.
Goodness.
People
Yeah.
sue us for it.
I mean, again, I don't, I mean, I'm hearing, I feel like I'm at least partly in the minority here, which it is what it is. It's, again, I feel strongly about this, but others feel strongly in the other direction. But I guess, is there a willingness to try to take a step? Because again, I don't want to go there and then go back. We're seeing the county commissioners right now talking about taking it out. I think that creates much more of an issue than when it's out, putting it back in and then taking it back out. Is there potential to do everything but have it be part of the recording at this point? And have that as a potential step 2, depending upon if people feel like their concerns are addressed by everything we're doing in step 1.
So I think to iterate, that would be, what that would be to, the sign up would be in the meeting, not prior electronically like we have, and we would do that vetting in the meeting. We would have one
Before the meeting,
before the meeting, and we can talk about that in a second, but we would have the sign up in the meeting. We would have one session, not specific to the agenda, just say what you need to say, John Mayer song, right? And then I do think I wrote down, I think a blurb, I'm gonna say a blurb that we read about what is the intention, what is the purpose, and kind of what are the big parameters, not the policy, but a blurb that we read just as good practice so that everybody is reminded of the purpose and impetus of why we're there. I think that would be helpful too, that we could just read and even maybe put on the agendas underneath the session part.
Started to do that.
Can I do a clarification? If we have the sign up in the meeting, but the session's before the meeting,
Meaning it would be like
so everybody would always be here at 5:30?
yes.
Or change the time.
Well, then we have to change the time, but yes, the sign up would be at 5:30 now. Or 5.
Then everybody,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be cancel that like we do now. It'd be
Right.
everybody gets here at
Correct.
5:30
If you want.
every time.
And people would have the ability.
Change the time.
So I think it would be good to, again, use the policy committee for this, right? So I'm saying this as someone who was on the committee and not anymore, so sorry, but I think given the guidance on here, come back and look at the 2 options that are being proposed. I think there's alignment on what you said, but then there's also the short-term iterative versus the longer term that was articulated. And really take a look at what those 2 policies would look like, and then we could then look at it and evaluate and vote as a board and see what we want to do, which is the kind of what you're saying is a recap within, but keep it before, have the full idea of what that implementation and the ramifications are, which is, 5:30, we're there and for 30 minutes because nobody's there. And then the other one would be moving it back into the meeting at the beginning, and what that would look like and how we would potentially account for students and stuff like that.
And I was just gonna ask if you could do it at the end, after, if that way during the meeting, people had the ability to sign up. And then after, because then you know where you're at.
Yeah, let's let the committee figure out what that
Okay.
recommendation is and then bring back, and then
Do that.
that's 2 options.
But then you have the issue, well, again,
Because then they'd have the ability to sign up during.
but you'd also have, you don't know when the end of the meeting is.
For executive session.
Yeah.
So if you have, so maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so the committee can then figure out what they want to recommend, have those 2 options, and then we can all kind of read and then decide.
does seem like we need a full board discussion between those 2 options. I'm not even clear what I heard.
Well, and then that way we're acting to something concrete, right? We have it listed out and we can actually even
This
have
is
the,
what it will look like, and
here's
there's
the policy, here's how it would get implemented. Here's this version of policy, and then we have a
So
choice
we would go
between
back to the
2.
policy committee to come up with the 2 iterations. And then bring it to
I
the.
think that makes sense.
Okay. Who's on the policy committee? You 2.
I mean, I'm out. I'm out.
Alex,
Not
I mean,
It'll be fun.
But I think we have to, I mean, I know it seems like a lot of back and forth, and I know that there are people that really want this done and now, but I feel like we have to take our time to have the right policy in place.
I just want to make sure we're also moving it forward too, so
Yeah.
not having the same discussions over and over again on this.
Absolutely, but I think we have to get it right because, again, I do think to Julie's point, and again, it in the minority probably, but I do think that the back and forth does not look good. I mean, and the fact that, that is not, and the fact that, the commissioners are taking it out because they don't like what's being said. That's not good either. Like, we have to be able to,
Well, I
People say,
can't help them.
I know.
Okay, so I think policy committee has some work to do. I've got some notes here. Yeah, so I've got all that and we'll.
Oh, I guess I'm running a meeting. I need to be just.
Second session.
Okay, anything, all right, so I need a motion to enter into executive session for the purpose of,
To prepare for conducting or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment. Per Ohio Revised Code 121.22G4.
do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Singh, please.
Mr. Argo,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer,
Yes.
Ms. Casper.
Yes. We will not be taking any action when we come back, just to adjourn.
Dean of culture.
I would like to take a class taught by him, I'm not gonna lie.
So, well, here it comes. You go to Kentucky.
Well, at least it's
No,
going.
no.
You ready? There's something. I'm not being honest, we were all like.
You're out on a limb there.
Are we ready? Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm pulling us out of executive session and asking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, Mr. Zink, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Argo,
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer,
Yes.
Ms. Casper.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Be careful out there.